Do you keep seeing yourself back in your old school? Not visiting, not remembering, actually there, walking those same hallways, sitting in those same classrooms, with that same heavy feeling in your chest that you can't explain when you wake up. And the strangest part, you graduated, you left. Maybe it's been 5 years, maybe 10. Maybe you've tried so hard to forget that place ever existed, but it keeps pulling you back every few weeks, sometimes every few nights. Like something in that building still has your name written somewhere. Like a door was left open that was never supposed to be. Like part of you never actually walked out. And you've never told anyone because how do you explain that? How do you say, my old school visits me in my sleep and it terrifies me without sounding like you've lost your mind? You don't sound crazy. You sound like someone who is finally ready to know the truth. Because what I discovered about why this keeps happening, it wasn't anxiety, it wasn't stress. It wasn't just your brain processing old memories. It was something much darker than that. And once I tell you what it is, you will never look at that dream the same way again. Let me ask you something first. In the dream, are you lost? Like you're walking hallways that should be familiar, but something is slightly off. The doors are in the wrong places. The corridors stretch longer than they should. You're looking for a classroom you can never quite find. Or maybe you're sitting in an exam, a subject you never studied, a test you didn't know was coming. And everyone around you is writing, and you're just sitting there with a blank page and this crushing wave of shame washing over you. Or maybe, and this is the one that really gets people, you're back there as your current age, not as the teenager you were, as the adult you are right now, trapped inside a school you were supposed to have outgrown, surrounded by people who look at you like you never left, like you were never supposed to leave. If any of that sounds familiar, I need you to keep watching because these aren't random variations of the same dream. They are messages, specific ones, and each version means something completely different. But before I get into that, I need to tell you my story first, because without it, you won't believe what I found out. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you for not believing it. I didn't believe it either, not at first. I was 24 when the dreams came back with a vengeance. I say came back because honestly, they never fully stopped. Even in the years right after school, I'd get them occasionally. I'd wake up, shake it off, make coffee, go about my day. But at 24, they became something different, more frequent, more vivid, more suffocating. I remember the specific night it escalated. It was a Tuesday. I know because I had a work presentation the next morning and I'd gone to bed early specifically to get a full night's rest. Instead, I found myself standing in the corridor outside room 14. Room 14 was my Form 1 classroom. I hadn't thought about that room consciously in years. But there I was, standing outside it, and I could hear something on the other side of the door. Not voices, not a teacher speaking, something lower than that. Something that vibrated in my chest more than my ears. I reached for the handle and I woke up. Just like that. Hand outstretched in my dark bedroom, heart slamming against my ribs. 3:17 a.m. on the clock. I sat up and I thought, why room 14? Why that specific room? And that's when I made a mistake that I now understand was not a mistake at all. I started trying to remember. I started journaling the dreams, writing down every detail the moment I woke up before they dissolved the way dreams do. And patterns began to emerge that made my skin crawl. The dreams always took place after dark. Even when I arrived at school in daylight in the dream, by the time anything significant happened, the light had shifted to something gray and wrong, like a sky that couldn't decide whether it was dusk or an eclipse. There was always a teacher I couldn't see clearly, always standing at a distance, always watching me but turning away before I could make eye contact, and there was always a sound, that low vibration, coming from somewhere inside the building, something I was always moving toward whether I wanted to or not. My legs would carry me forward, even when my mind was screaming to turn around. I told my older sister about it one evening. I expected her to laugh. She didn't. She went quiet in a way that made me feel cold. Then she said, "You went to St. Augustine's, right?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Did you ever wonder what was there before they built it?" I had never wondered that. Not once in the 6 years I spent inside those walls. I asked her what she meant. She looked at me for a long moment and then she said, "Ask Mama's old friend, Auntie Veronica. Ask her about that land." I almost didn't. I wish I could tell you. I wish I had listened to that instinct. But I went to see Auntie Veronica on a Saturday morning, and she told me something that rearranged everything. Auntie Veronica is 71 years old. She was born in that town. She has watched it change. She remembers what things looked like before the roads were paved and before the buildings went up. I sat across from her with a cup of tea I didn't touch and I asked her about the land where my school was built. She didn't answer immediately. She got up, walked to her window, looked out at the street for almost a full minute. Then she said, "That ground was used." I asked her what she meant by used. She turned around and she looked at me with eyes that were completely steady and completely serious, and she said, "There are things that were done on that land before your school existed. Things that were meant to create a hold on everyone who passed through." I felt the hairs rise on my arms. I said, "What kind of things?" She shook her head. "That's not for me to describe in detail, but I will tell you this. When you build a school on top of certain kinds of ground, and when the people who built it knew what they were doing, the children who come through don't just learn lessons from teachers." She paused. "They get marked." The tea went completely cold in my hands. "Marked for what?" I whispered. She sat back down, folded her hands, and said the words that I have not stopped thinking about since that Saturday morning. "Marked so that the place can always find them, no matter how far they go, no matter how many years pass, the ground remembers them, and it calls them back in the only way it can." She looked directly at me. "Through sleep. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Old woman, superstition, folklore. Your brain looking for a dramatic explanation for a common dream." I thought all of those things, almost in that exact order. I went home and I opened my laptop and I spent 4 hours reading peer reviewed psychology on recurring school dreams. Sleep researchers, cognitive behavioral therapists, neuroscientists studying memory consolidation. And here is what the science says: school dreams are among the most universally reported recurring dreams on Earth, across cultures, across continents, across generations. People who attended school in Nigeria, in Norway, in Brazil, in Japan, all reporting the same core dream, the same hallways, the same lost feeling, the same exam they didn't prepare for, the same teacher watching from a distance. Psychology calls it an anxiety dream, a metaphor for performance pressure in adult life. And that explanation works. It's clean, it's rational, it lets you go back to sleep. But here's where it broke down for me. I spoke to a woman, I'll call her Sandra, who had been a teacher at a school for 22 years. She had never been a student there. She joined the staff as an adult. She had the dreams too. Same hallways, same gray light, same sound she couldn't identify. She'd only worked there. She'd never sat in those classrooms as a child. There was no childhood anxiety attached to that building for her. So why was it visiting her at night? Psychology had no answer for that. And that's when I stopped trying to explain it away. Here is the part of the story I hesitated to include, because this is where it stops being something you can nod along to comfortably. I found a group online, a private forum. People sharing recurring dreams about specific institutions, schools, churches, government buildings, hospitals, places they'd spent formative time, places that wouldn't release them in sleep. I read for weeks before I posted anything, and the accounts I read in that forum did something to my understanding of reality that I am still rebuilding from. There was a man, mid 30s, software engineer, completely rational by his own description, who had been having the school dream for 11 years. Same school, same corridor, same classroom at the end that he could never quite reach. One night in the dream, he finally reached it. He said the door opened, and inside was not a classroom. It was a room he had never seen in waking life. Stone floor, no windows, and in the center something he described only as an arrangement. He wouldn't say what kind. He said just describing it made him feel like he was still inside the dream. He woke up with a nosebleed. He woke up with mud on his feet. He lived in a third floor apartment. He had not been outside. Now I know. I know how that sounds. But there were 47 responses to his post from people saying, "This happened to me too." Different schools, different countries. Same experience of waking up with physical evidence of somewhere they had not physically been. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I'm not done. Let me go back to my own dreams for a moment because around this time, while I was deep in this research, while I was speaking to people and reading accounts and trying to build a picture of what was actually happening, the dreams shifted. The teacher I could never quite see clearly started getting closer, not in a comforting way, in the way that something approaches when it knows you've started to look for it, when it senses that the distance between you is closing, not because it's walking toward you, but because you've been walking toward it. In one dream, I got close enough to see the shape of a face. It was not a teacher I recognized. It was not a person I had ever seen in waking life, but it knew my name. I couldn't hear it speaking, but I knew. The way you know things in dreams with a certainty you can't explain. I knew it was saying my name. Specifically, deliberately, I woke up at 3:33 a.m. I looked it up later. I know. The internet is full of noise on this subject, but I looked up the significance of that time, and what I found in three completely separate and unrelated spiritual sources was the same phrase: the hour when veils are thinnest. I closed my laptop and I didn't open it again for 3 days. There is a woman I am going to call Minister Grace. I was directed to her by someone in the forum. She had spent years in deliverance ministry specifically focused on what she called territorial and institutional attachments. She had heard thousands of testimonies. She had worked with people from every background, every level of education, every degree of skepticism. She agreed to speak to me on the condition that I didn't record the conversation. I'm going to tell you what she said as accurately as I can from memory and notes. She said, "Schools are one of the most spiritually dangerous institutions on earth and one of the least discussed because we associate schools with innocence, with children, with growth. We don't think of them as sites of spiritual activity. But think about what a school actually is." I waited. She said, "It is a place where young human beings, at their most open, most impressionable, most spiritually porous, are gathered together in one location for hours every day, for years. Their minds are being actively shaped, their identities are being formed. They are being taught what is real, what is true, what is possible, what they are worth." She paused. "If you were a spiritual force that wanted access to human beings at their most malleable, where would you set up?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She continued. "Some schools were built intentionally on spiritually compromised ground. Some had rituals performed in them that the students never knew about. Some had, and this is the part people find hardest to accept, some had staff members who were not just teachers, who were placed there for a purpose beyond education. I thought about that teacher at the end of the hall. The dreams," I said. "Why the dreams?" she said. "Because whatever was planted in that place was planted in you when you were there, and it needs to maintain the connection. Sleep is when your conscious defenses are down. Sleep is when the door between what you know and what was done to you without your knowledge swings open." My hands were shaking on the notepad. "Can it be broken?" I asked. The connection, can it be severed? She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, that depends entirely on whether you're willing to face what's on the other side of that classroom door. I need to stop here, right here, in the middle of everything, because I've been building towards something and I don't want to rush past it. Here's is what I now believe after the research, after the conversations, after my own experiences, after the testimonies of dozens of people who had no reason to lie and nothing to gain from making this up. The school dream is not one thing, it is a category. And within that category, there are different dreams doing different things. Some of them are exactly what psychology says they are: anxiety, processing. Your brain running simulations of old stress so it can handle new stress. That's real, that happens. If your dreams are occasional and you wake up just mildly unsettled, that is probably what's happening. You're okay, but some of them are something else entirely. If the dreams are frequent, if they escalate, if there are specific repeating details that don't change no matter how many years pass, if there is a presence, a teacher, a figure, a door that recurs with intention, if you wake up at specific hours, if you wake up with physical sensations that don't match your sleeping environment, if there are emotions in the dream that feel less like your own emotions and more like something being poured into you, that is a different category. That is what Minister Grace called an institutional soul tie. A connection between you and a place, or more accurately, between you and whatever resides in a place, that was formed without your consent, sometimes without anyone's conscious knowledge, and that persists across time and distance because it was built to. And here is the part that will stay with you after this video ends. Every single time you return to that school in your dream and you feel that fear, that shame, that crushing sense of being trapped and watched and not good enough, that is not your anxiety speaking. That is the connection feeding. Let me say that again so it lands properly. Those feelings of inadequacy, of exposure, of never being enough, that the dream reliably produces in you even decades after graduation. Those feelings are not incidental. They are the point. They are what is being harvested from you every time that door opens in the night. And you have been feeding it without knowing for years. After my conversation with Minister Grace, I couldn't stop. I went back to my hometown. I want to be careful here about how much identifying information I share, but I will tell you this. I spent 2 days in a municipal records office and a church archive that had been there longer than the school had, and I found something. The land the school was built on had a previous structure. Most people in the town didn't know this. The school had been there long enough that it had become the thing that was always there, in the way that institutions do when they outlast living memory. But in a ledger from 1951, handwritten, water damage, easy to miss, there was a record of a demolition of a previous building. The building was described only as a lodge. I asked the archivist what that might mean in the context of that era in that region. She said very carefully, without looking up from what she was doing, lodges in that period were often meeting places for various kinds of groups, not always the kind that kept public records of their activities. She slid a secondary document across the counter to me without saying anything else. It was a list of names, men who had donated money and land for the construction of the school. I recognized one of the names immediately. It was the same surname as the teacher who had run my school's most feared disciplinary committee. The teacher who had seemed to know things
But I didn't
about
stop.
students
I
he
shouted
shouldn't have
louder.
known.
I
The
repeated it
teacher
again and
all the
again,
students
refusing
called
to go
the
silent.
watcher behind
And
his
then,
back
it
for
happened.
reasons
A sudden
nobody could
force, like a
articulate
strong
really.
wind,
He
rushed
could
through the
still
room
listen
without
to be
touching anything
looking at
physical,
you
but I
even in
felt it
his
pass through
hospital
me.
room.
The wall
I
cracked,
stood very
not a
still in
physical
that
crack,
records
but the mark
office,
split,
and I
like a line
thought
of light
about
cutting
every
through
student
darkness.
who had
The
passed
circle
through those
broke.
doors.
The pressure
Thousands
disappeared
of us,
instantly. The
decade after
whispers stopped.
decade, all
Everything
marked,
went
all
still.
connected,
I
all
collapsed to
dreaming,
the floor,
all
breathing
feeding
heavily,
something we
tears
didn't
running
know
down my
existed.
face.
I
For the
have to
first time
tell you
since all this
about the
began,
night I
there was
made the
no
decision
presence,
that changed
no watching,
everything.
no
It was a
waiting,
Thursday,
just silence.
early
Real
November, rain
silence.
against the
I stayed
windows.
there for a
I
long
went to
time,
bed
not
knowing
moving,
the
not
dream would
speaking,
come.
just
They'd
feeling
been coming
free.
every
But
night
as
at
I
that
slowly
point.
stood up and looked
Every
around the
single
room,
night,
something caught
like
my
a door on a
attention. The
schedule.
wall was
But
normal
this
again.
time I had
No
prepared.
mark.
I
No
had
sign
spoken to
anything had
someone,
happened.
a
It was
prayer
as if it had
warrior,
never
an
been there.
older
I
woman who
wiped
had
my
helped
tears,
people make
trying to
it the
understand,
exact
trying to
spiritual
believe it was
territory
finally
for
over.
30 years.
Then my eyes
And
dropped to
she
the
had
floor.
given me
And that was when
instructions,
my heart sank again.
specific ones, things
My
to
phone
say,
was
things to
on.
hold on
I was
to,
sure I had
things
turned it
to
off
do when
earlier.
I became
The screen
aware
was
in a
glowing
dream
softly.
that I was dreaming,
Slowly, I picked
lucid
it up.
dreaming in a
There was a
sense,
recording
but not
open.
for
My
exploration,
voice.
for
Playing.
confrontation.
I
I went
pressed
to
stop
sleep. I
immediately, my
arrived at
hands
the
shaking.
corridor,
I
the
don't
gray
remember
light,
recording
the
anything.
smell,
I
the
don't remember
impossible
speaking.
length of the
But the file
hallway
was there.
stretching ahead of
And
me.
before I could
And
delete
this
it,
time,
another
instead of being
notification
carried
appeared.
forward by
Sent.
legs I couldn't
My breath
control,
caught in
I
my throat.
slipped. I
Sent?
stood completely
Sent to who?
still.
I
I
opened
said
it.
out
No
loud in this
contact
dream,
name.
with every
Just a
weight of
number.
intention I
Unknown.
had, what I
The
had
same
to
number
do
that
to
had
say.
messaged me
I'm
before.
not going to
My
repeat
body
it
went
here,
cold.
word for
Because
word.
if that
Not
recording was
because it's
sent, it
secret,
means something
not
I
because
said,
I
something
believe the
from this
words
story,
carry a
is now
weight.
somewhere
I'm
else.
not in a
Still
position to
moving.
hand to
Still
strangers
spreading.
without
And as I
context.
stood there,
What I will
trying
say
to
is that it
understand what
was a
was happening,
declaration
another
of
message came
ownership,
in.
of
Just
identity,
one line.
of
The
whose I
circle
was,
is
and
broken,
therefore what I
but the
was not
echo
available
remains.
to. The
I
hallway
slowly lowered the
changed.
phone, my
The light
heart beating
shifted
heavily,
from
my
gray
mind
to
racing with
something
one
darker,
terrifying thought.
something
What
that
if
felt
breaking free was
angry
never
in
the
the
end?
way that
What if it only
environments
changed the
are
way it
not supposed
follows?
to feel. That teacher at the end of the hall, the faceless one, turned toward me for the first time, and then did something I have not fully processed even now. It stepped backward. For the first time in years of these dreams, that presence stepped backward, and the corridor began to close, not collapsing, releasing, like a fist opening, like a grip letting go. I woke up at 4 a.m., not sweating, not panicking, completely still, completely clear. And for the first time since I was 24 years old, I felt like I had genuinely woken up. Let me speak directly to you now, because I've been telling you my story, but this was always about yours. If you are watching this, you are almost certainly someone who has had this dream, maybe for years, maybe your whole adult life. And some part of you has always known, the way you know things in your bones before your mind catches up, that there was more to it than stress. Here is what I want you to understand. The specific details of your dream are a language. They are telling you something precise. If you are always lost in the dream, wandering corridors, unable to find your classroom, this speaks to an identity confusion that was planted in you during those years. Something in that environment worked on your sense of who you were and where you belonged. You graduated, but you carried the question out with you. Do I even belong here in my own life? In my own success? If you are always failing an exam, unprepared, exposed, ashamed, this speaks to a spirit of inadequacy that attached during your school years, a belief sown in you by that environment that you will always be found lacking, that you are always one assessment away from being revealed as not enough. And that feelings you, doesn't it? Not just in dreams, in boardrooms, in relationships, in quiet moments when things are going well and you're waiting for it to fall apart. That is not your personality that was installed. If there is a figure watching you, a teacher, an authority, something that knows your name, this is the most serious category. This is what Minister Grace would call an assignment, a specific spiritual attention, not random, not symbolic, directed at you by name. If you have woken up with physical sensations, heaviness, paralysis, temperature changes, marks you can't explain, the veil in your case has been thinner than most. I say all of this not to frighten you. I say it because the first step out of anything is understanding what you're actually standing in. This is the part I almost left out, because I don't want this to tip into horror for its own sake. That's not what this is. But I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you about the people in that forum and the people Minister Grace described to me who stayed in the cycle, who never questioned the dreams, who accepted them as just something that happens, who went back to sleep and fed the connection for decades without ever knowing. She described a man who had been in a state of low grade spiritual oppression for 30 years that he had normalized so completely he thought it was just his personality. A persistent sadness, a ceiling on his joy, a feeling that he was always slightly outside his own life, watching it happen rather than living it. When they began to work through his history, one of the first things that surfaced was a school, a specific institution, a specific period, a specific teacher who had always given him a feeling he couldn't name. He had the dream. He'd had it for 30 years. He'd never once questioned it. She told me about others. A woman who self sabotaged every significant relationship in her adult life, tracing a pattern back to emotional architecture laid in her during 5 years at a boarding school. Invisible rules she'd absorbed about her worth, her voice, her right to be chosen. The school wasn't haunting her. The school had taught her who she was, and she had believed it, and carried it, and built her entire adult life on a foundation that was laid for her by something that didn't have her interests at heart. The dream was a maintenance signal, a reminder to stay small, a hand on the shoulder in the night saying, "Remember where you come from. Remember what you were told you were." And she had been nodding in her sleep for 20 years. I want you to do something. Right now, or tonight, or the next time the dream comes. I want you to ask yourself one question, not in the dream, before it. The question is this: what did I leave behind in that school that I was never meant to leave behind? Not objects, not friendships, though those matter. What part of yourself? Because here is what I discovered in all of this, in the research, in the conversations, in my own terrifying and ultimately liberating journey through this. The school dream is ultimately about a theft. Something was taken from you during those years, not violently, not obviously, in the slow, patient, unremarkable way that institutions work on children over years, in the accumulated weight of what you were told about yourself, what was rewarded and what was punished. What was made of your curiosity and your questions and your strangeness and your particular way of seeing the world? They took parts of you that you didn't know were valuable. They replaced them with something more manageable, more gradable, more useful to the systems that needed you to be a certain kind of person. And the dream, on the most human level, beneath the spiritual, beneath the psychological, in the most basic and aching and honest layer of it. The dream is you going back to find what was lost. Your legs carry you forward even when you're terrified because something in you knows. You left something in that building, and part of you has never stopped trying to retrieve it. So, what do you do with all of this? That is the question you've been waiting for. I know. I was waiting for it too when I was in the middle of it, drowning in information and experience and spiritual vertigo, just wanting someone to tell me what to do. Here is what I did. And here is what I believe, based on everything I've lived and learned, that you can do. First, name it. Stop calling it just a dream. The moment you dismiss it, you give up your ability to address it. Name what is happening. Something in that past experience has an ongoing connection to your present. That is real, that deserves attention. Second, map the dream. Start writing it down, every detail, the recurring ones specifically, because the dream is a map of exactly what was done and what was taken. The details are not random, they are a diagnostic. They are telling you precisely where to look. Third, understand that this is spiritual before it is psychological. I'm not dismissing therapy. Therapy saved me in different ways, and I believe in it. But no amount of reframing will sever a spiritual attachment. You need spiritual authority to address a spiritual problem. For me, that authority came through faith, through prayer, through people who understood this territory and had walked others through it. I won't tell you what form that takes for you, but I will tell you that intellectual analysis alone will not close this door. I tried for years. It doesn't work. Fourth, reclaim your identity. The feelings the dream produces, the inadequacy, the shame, the sense of never being enough, reject them consciously and specifically, not by repeating affirmations in the mirror, by understanding their origin. They were installed. They are not native to you. They belong to a system that needed you diminished, and you can give them back. Fifth, and this one is the one that will stay with you longest. Go find what was taken, not literally, not physically. You don't need to drive back to that building, but in prayer, in reflection, in whatever form of inner archaeology you're willing to undertake. Go find a version of yourself that existed before the institution got its hands on you. The child who was curious before they were graded on their curiosity, who was joyful before they were ranked on their joy, who was whole before they were told what parts of them were acceptable. That child is still there. They are the one walking those corridors at 3 in the morning. They are not trying to terrorize you. They are trying to come home. The last dream I had about my old school was 8 months ago. I was standing outside room 14 again, but this time the door was already open, and inside, no stone floor, no arrangement, no grey terrible light, just a classroom, empty, ordinary, sunlight through windows, and a small desk in the corner with a notebook on it. I walked over, picked it up. My name was on the cover, written in a child's handwriting, mine. I opened it, and it was full of things I had forgotten I knew, ways of seeing the world I had been trained out of, questions I had stopped asking, a particular kind of wonder that had been very quietly, very systematically, over 6 years of institutional life, educated out of me. I held it and I cried in the dream the way you cry when something you've grieved for years unexpectedly comes back. Then I walked out of room 14, down the corridor, out the front door of St. Augustine's, into sunlight, and I woke up at 7:15 in the morning, no sweat, no fear, no pounding heart, just the feeling of someone who had finally, after a very long time, finished a journey they didn't know they were on. I don't know what is in your dream, but I know there is something in it that is yours. And I know that whatever was built to keep you from it is not stronger than you. It never was. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who keeps going back. They need to hear it. And if you want to talk about what you've been experiencing, drop it in the comments. You are not alone in this, not even close.